following program contains topical discussions related to suicide. If you are feeling suicidal or need help for yourself or someone you know, please dial 988 in the U.S. or contact your local mental health services. Welcome to the Hope Debrief, a suicide bereavement caretaker conversation. I'm your host, Robbie Graham, and with me is my lovely wife, Denise Graham. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here.
So, Denise, I'm excited. I know I'm not a real outgoing type of person, but I'm excited because this is our first official podcast. And I know we've been talking about it now, we've been planning it, but now we're actually doing it, and I'm excited about that. We already have a fantastic lineup of speakers, both for the rest of this year as well as next year, talking about topics related to and the many aspects of suicide, grief, and postvention. So with that said, we were talking earlier, and I loved how you said it. Will you take a moment and talk about the audience that we intend this podcast to be for, the people we want to connect with through this podcast?
Yes, absolutely. When we talk about postvention, postvention is what you do to support people that have been impacted by a suicide loss. We're talking about suicide survivor, loss survivor support, and not attempt survivor support. I just want to make sure that's clear. And when I think about our audience, I think about a wide range of people. I think about mental health professionals. I think about researchers, suicide loss support group facilitators, loss team members, and we'll talk more later about what loss teams are. This is really for anybody that's journeying with people, whether it's their personal life or they volunteer in this capacity. They're journeying with people that are bereaved by suicide. Excellent.
Now, today's podcast, we're going to do a little bit differently because we don't have a third person that we're interviewing together or talking to together. It's just you and I, and we wanted to have a conversation with you to kind of give you an idea of who we are, why we do what we do. So are you ready? We'll just dive right
ready.
into it.
Let's go for it.
So we have to start with the fact of why are we passionate about this work? And that really begins with Dre.
Yes.
He was my stepson. I do have another son from a previous relationship. And Dre was your only biological child.
Yes.
And so because of that, I'm going to kind of look to you for this part because I think you might have known him a little bit better than everyone else. You were mom. I can tell you some stuff, but you were mom. And so what would you like to share about Dre?
I still am mom.
You still are mom. Yes,
Lesson number one.
Thank you.
On the Hope Debrief,
Yes.
I still am mom.
Yes, you are.
Dre's, he was a great kid. He grew up in a suburb in Columbus, Ohio, and just had lifelong friends, was a soccer kid, loved his car, we found out he had been racing, didn't realize that, but in hindsight, we should have known because he was constantly blowing out his engine. But just a great group of friends. He was a connector. He brought people together. He had an awesome sense of humor. His biting sarcasm, I thought, was just delightful. I'm not sure everybody else agrees with that, but Dre was just my dude. He was just my dude. We shared music. He's just my dude.
Yeah. Now, Dre did come, obviously from a divorced home, because I've talked about I had a child from a previous relationship. But you had, even before I showed up, you had a good relationship with his dad and his stepmom. And then even after we got married, we went and spent Thanksgiving there one year.
Yes.
So he came from a solid home life in both respects. It wasn't perfect, but it was solid. And I bring that up because I know so many times we prejudge. We assume if we haven't experienced a suicide loss, sometimes we can prejudge as certain types of people who come, well, their home life was this or they were that. And so we prejudge a lot of times.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I was one of those people before losing Dre to suicide, before he died. if I heard about a suicide, I would automatically assume, oh, something's going on in that home. There's some broken relationships going on. There's something up there. So I was one of those judgers. So I get it. Yeah. But I've learned the hard way. We've learned the hard way that suicide is an equal opportunity offender. It impacts everybody regardless of skin color, socioeconomic status, religion. It doesn't matter. It can impact anybody. And unfortunately, we are living proof of that.
Yes, indeed. So now after Dre died, and you actually did this a little bit quicker than I did, getting involved in the postvention work that we've done. I was hesitant because, one, I still had some other responsibilities to taking care of the family. And so I kind of wrestled with the whole, I had to go to work and be smiling, happy. But you were able, and I'm grateful for it. Please don't misunderstand. I'm grateful you were able to dive into it the way you were. And you got involved in it about a year or two after we lost Dre. But so many people ask, though, how can you, having experienced something like this, why would you want to step into somebody else's trauma?
Yeah, it's not for everybody. Just like I have friends that have been impacted by a suicide loss because we seek each other out, man. We find each other, and there's just this unity that happens, this bond. I know some people that have lost somebody dear to them to suicide, and they volunteer on the suicide hotline. And I have no category for that. No. I could never do that. So it's just, we're all different. We all have different ways of engaging or not engaging the suicide space, because some of us don't have the luxury or don't want to do volunteer work in this capacity, which is perfectly fine as well. So when I think about our engagement with it, it started with me Googling about a year. It was just over a year after Dre had died. I'm Googling suicide grief support, suicide loss support. I'm looking for support groups. I'm looking for something where I can connect with other people that have a similarly lived experience. Yeah. And I came across the Loss Team Conference, local outreach to suicide survivors. And we're going to talk more about that shortly. But specifically, the Loss Team Conference in 2013 just happened to be in Columbus, Ohio. So it was no more than 10, 15 miles from our home. So I just happened to stumble across that. And I went to this conference thinking I'm going to pick up some ideas, meet some people and pick up some ideas on how to process my grief, on how to continue to engage this, because this is a long process. There's not closure. Don't let anybody tell you there's closure. There's integration. You learn how to integrate this into your life, and that looks different in different seasons. So I went there, and the first speaker, of course, the keynote speaker, was Dr. Frank Campbell, and he's the founder of the Loss Team model.
And we're going to talk about him a little bit
We are going to talk about him. And I listened to him present this idea of loss teams and helping people in the immediate aftermath, right then and there, with resources, support, understanding, and hope. And I was hooked. It's like, where was this when my son died? Oh my gosh, that would have been so amazing. So I was hooked right away and got to work, met some people, walked into this conference not knowing a single person, and walked out of the conference knowing 3 or 4 people, besides Frank, that 3 or 4 people that lived right here in Columbus, Ohio. And they were there because they were passionate about postvention as well and helping the bereaved by suicide. And so found my herd, my like-minded people that wanted to put something together in Columbus and implement this model of active postvention.
Isn't it amazing? I know for me, just how easily we seem to connect with other survivors, people who've lost someone to suicide. I mean, we can be doing something totally unrelated, and we still seem to meet somebody somehow. It's just, that's amazing to me. So along those same lines, so you met them, and you guys are talking about doing something. What did next steps look like after that?
Next steps, wow. To be honest, I put together a big ass spreadsheet Am I allowed to say that?
I
just said it.
Just said it.
But it's true.
To
That's
quickly
basically
explain,
what I did.
You
and
had a
that's,
business background, too.
I did. So
Yeah.
I used my business background, and I'm such an Excel geek. I started putting together, based on the conference and what I learned about this lost team model, how do we make this happen? How do we find volunteers? How do we get buy-in from law enforcement, from the coroner's office? I just started to put together this very large Excel document and started working with this small team that I met at the conference. And Glenn, who I met after the conference, a few months after the conference, just this small team of us to start knocking out these questions that we had. What could this look like? How do we do this? How do we do that? And it went from there. It went from there.
Yeah.
We ended up about 6 months after all of this, we ended up in front of Dr. Jan Gorniak, who we're going to do a
We have an
podcast
upcoming
with
one,
soon.
yes.
Dr. Jan Gorniak was the coroner in Columbus, Ohio, in Franklin County at the time, and got in front of her and talked to her about this lost team model and why we need it and why it's important to actually have trained volunteers that have been impacted by a suicide loss themselves show up and support people immediately at the scene. And we do that a lot with listening. We're not there to fix anything. There's no fixing this. We're there as a kindred spirit, if you will, that's just, you introduce yourself. Hello, my name is Denise. I lost my son to suicide. Or sometimes I don't even say that. I just say I lost somebody special to me to suicide, and I'm here to support you in any way I can. I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'll sit there with them. So laying this out for Dr. Gorniak, and wow, she latched onto it and loved the idea.
Yes, she did.
And it kind of took off from there.
Now, it ended up being a fairly easy sell with her because she totally got it and had a vision for it. That's not always an easy sell, though, for like law enforcement, was it? And
not always for the coroner's offices or a medical examiner. It's different, depending on what state you're in.
Because they get kind of hung up on them. They think we're intruding, and we have no plan on intruding. We want to be there just to support the survivors.
That's certainly one of the objections. There's several, and that's probably another episode. But
yes, another episode unto itself. So we started off here just with the LOST team, going out a team, and LOST stands for, as I think Denise has already said, Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors. If you guys want more information, we'll have a link on this episode's webpage. Just go to lostteam.com for more information as well. But we go out, teams of 2 or 3 would go to the scene with resources for the survivors. But we quickly found that we needed to expand.
We did.
Yeah.
We did. We had people, well, at that point it was still I'm saying we. You weren't quite on board with this yet.
I was still the behind the scenes helping.
I had people and the volunteers that we had recruited, we had people following up with us saying, do you have a support group? How can I sign up for your support group? It's like, well, we don't have a support group, but there's other support groups throughout Central Ohio, and those resources, we gave them to them in the resource folder when we saw them that horrible day. And it was, well, but we met you and we were comfortable with you. We'd like to attend your support group. And that became well, do you have a newsletter? Do you send out information? No, we don't have that either. We didn't have anything. We just wanted to launch a LOST team so we could share resources that already were in place in Central Ohio. But people wanted to come back to us. There was a bond.
Yeah. And it's and another reason why I wanted to bring that up was because a lot of times, especially if you're not familiar with LOST teams, if you go look it up, a lot of LOST teams just do the responding part, where they go and bring resources. We were a little bit unusual. There's others that do it, especially now, over the past 10 years. I know that it's grown a lot, but we were one of the few that actually was a standalone. We were our own nonprofit and offered support groups and remembrance events.
Eventually we did.
Yeah.
It was a process. It seemed like each year we took on a little something new. So we launched our LOST team in 2014. We launched in 2015 or 16 this one-on-one mentoring and a newsletter. In 2017, we launched our first support group. Yeah. So we took on just a little bit at a time. We tried to pace ourselves. We didn't want to burn out. And that's hard for me because I was really, we got to go. We got people to help. But that's kind of the sequence of events.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to finish up on this topic of what we did, because it was the inevitable question comes up is where did the money come from to do these things?
Yep.
And I know there may be some other people who maybe are looking at starting a loss team, or maybe in the process of starting one now, or maybe they started and they're just having trouble getting traction. They don't know, where do I go? How do I pay for this? You guys talk about all these things you did. How did we do it? And I also asked that with the intention of, I know that we had some great resources here in our community that we didn't even realize at first that we were able to tap into.
No, we had a lot of homework to do because we wanted to educate ourselves. We didn't want to fill a need that was actually already being met and just needed more support and more focus. So financially, part of our biggest wins financially were connecting with our local mental health board. So in Ohio, we have mental health and recovery boards in each county, and connecting with them, our first opportunity to work with them was we won a $5,000 grant to launch a website. And that was a lot of money. That was a lot of money when you're first getting started. That's a lot of money. I was very excited.
Yes, indeed.
We also connected with the Columbus Foundation, so local foundations in the community. ComFest, a community festival that we do each year, is huge here in Columbus.
Yes.
And they do a lot of work in the community, and we got to connect with them, and we're the recipients of a small $2,000 grant that helped us launch a scrapbooking get-together that we started doing once a month. We found scrapbooking was really therapeutic for a lot of the survivors. So we got real creative on the financial side and just started talking to people and knocking on doors and saying, this is what we want to do. This is why it's needed. Are you in? How would you like to support us? How would you like to help us? Do you see yourself being part of this, your agency being part of this?
That's awesome. Yeah, and it was through one of those, our local mental health board, that we were able to get a significant grant that allowed us to expand our staff, because it wasn't just these programs that we are seeing a need for. You have to have people to be able to run them and to manage those programs. And it was through that then I was able to come on full time.
You did, yes.
And
with a volunteer coordinator.
We had a volunteer coordinator, and then that's slowly expanded, and we added some more people on to our staff. So it was great, but it did take some work.
It's been a ride.
It took some homework to do that. Now, I know we could go on talking about all this, and there is a time I do want us in another episode to talk about what it's like, because we didn't just stop grieving while we were doing this.
Right.
We still had our own grief to manage.
Yes.
And that's a topic on its own, another great topic that we're going to be getting into. Self-care. But for us, I want to pivot now to talk about what we're doing now. And again, I'm going to look back to you because, one, she's much more articulate, as you can tell, than I am. And our ride has continued in a couple of really exciting ways.
Yes. I made the decision towards the second half of 2021 to resign from Lost Community Services, which is the organization that we had launched in 2014. I wanted to support people who were caretakers and trying to launch support groups and trying to launch lost teams. I wanted to help them do what we had done here in Columbus, Ohio. So left Lost Community Services at the end of 2021 and very quickly started working more closely with the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation. So, of course, Ohio, that's our heart, right?
Yeah.
We're the Buckeye State. Started doing a lot of work with the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation.
Yeah.
That was our first gig, so to speak. And it is still a very busy gig for us. We're grateful for all the Ohio work that we get to do. So we launched it's not a nonprofit, it's an LLC, Postvention Consulting LLC is the name of our organization. And we started this so that we could go out and support people who are supporting people, is basically what it comes down to.
Yeah, we provide training on how to start a lost team, a little bit that we talked about to even during this episode, training on how to do that, how to
Support
go
group
about
facilitator training.
support group facilitator training.
Thanks to Alan Wolfelt and all of his
Yes,
mentoring and training. Yes.
and which is going to be another episode. We're going to get to talk to him.
Yes.
I'm excited, looking forward to that too. So we were able to take what we'd done, and I say we really, I all kudos to you. You laid a lot of the groundwork, and I'm very
I'd
grateful
be lost without you.
because of your thank you.
You know that.
But because of your business background, you laid down a lot of groundwork that could easily be built on. So we worked there. We've now launched out on our own. But this past year, almost exactly a year, in 2023, from when we're doing this podcast, we got some news from Dr. Frank Campbell. Now, Dr. Frank Campbell, I told you before we were going to talk about him. He's the creator of the Lost Team model. It's based on his decades of work, his research with those who are bereaved by suicide, and he put this model together. He championed it, and after several decades of this, of championing the Lost Team postvention model, Frank decided to semi-retire. He's still doing some, going out and speaking, and he's still a champion. He hasn't stopped championing the model, but he wanted to step back a little bit, and he actually handed and asked Denise and I to kind of take the reins on the reins of lostteam.com, which is the website, but also the responsibility to continue growing and moving this into the future. I have to ask you, I remember when he reached out to us to talk to us about it, he kind of mentioned it as a side note on another conversation. What went through your mind when he mentioned it, said it to you?
Well, I had to follow up with him because I started reflecting more on this casual thing that he just happened to mention during a phone call about, yeah, I'm thinking maybe we need to have a conversation when I'm in Columbus in October about maybe you and Robbie and your interest in being overseers, whatever word he used, of the Lost Team movement. And it's like, oh, okay, we can talk about that. But of course, I followed up within a few days with at least a dozen questions for him. And the poor guy, he probably is thinking, oh my gosh, I just opened a big old can of worms because I got hold of it and got so excited. It was like, wait, what does this mean?
I remember we were both kind of bouncing off of each other. What does this mean? What does he really mean this? And
but it is such an honor and a blessing to be able to learn from people like Frank Campbell, Alan Wolfelt, Melinda Moore. I mean, just some of the all-stars of the suicide postvention space. And to be mentored by them, and then to have Frank in this case, want to hand off to us what he worked so hard to build. And what a blessing it is to be able to go out. Gosh, we're all over the country at this point, going out and working with people, helping them to launch Lost Teams next week. Actually, we're going to be in Tennessee. I'm not sure when this is actually going to be shared, this podcast, but next week we're going to be in Tennessee, in Knoxville. They're getting ready to launch a Lost Team, and we're doing an all-day training for them. Just really great stuff to be able to do this. It is such a blessing.
Yes, it is. And so as we're kind of wrapping up here, I do want to talk about the fact of we have been able to do work in several states now directly ourselves. Ohio, Indiana is a huge one. Michigan, you mentioned Tennessee. We've done work in Kentucky, Maryland. We're now starting to have some connections in New Jersey.
Vermont, New Jersey.
Vermont, New Jersey. Rhode Island, if you're listening, we'd love to connect with you. And it's exciting. It's exciting. And it's not because, and I don't say that to pat ourselves on the back. It's exciting because that's how the movement's going. We're getting so many more people engaged in the work of suicide postvention.
It's important. Postvention is prevention. And we talk about that a lot. We talk about it on our website, postventionconsulting.com. But it's true. Postvention is prevention.
Yes.
I had never experienced suicidal thoughts before my son died. But after he died, I struggled a handful of times over those first 5-ish years with just some really dark seasons of not wanting to wake up the next morning and really wondering, what's the point? What's the point in going on? People that have been impacted by a suicide loss, and it's not just family, it's friends, it's coworkers, it's more than just family.
Yeah.
People impacted by that, that's a really heavy load to carry, and they can struggle with suicidal thoughts. So that's why postvention and providing that hope, wanting to be that installation of hope to people that have been impacted, is so important. And that's ultimately our mission statement. Postvention Consulting's mission statement is to be an installation of hope by providing tools and training to caretakers, those folks that need to support the bereaved by suicide.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Denise, for engaging in this conversation with me. Because it's not like we talk all the time.
I know.
But I'm
That's
grateful.
another episode.
That's a whole nother episode.
How to work with your spouse.
Well, I wasn't thinking that, but I was thinking about, marriages, because a lot of marriages can be torn apart by
They
grief.
struggle after a suicide
And
loss,
I'm
after
very
specifically
grateful.
losing a child.
I'm very grateful that hasn't happened to us.
Thank you.
So we are going to spend an episode talking about that, though, because I think there's a lot to be said along those lines. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with everyone?
I feel really good about this. I'm excited about this podcast. This is your space. This is your baby. But I'm just going to follow his lead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Denise.
Thank you.
And as we close out this episode, I want to thank you again and thank you guys for joining us. A huge thank you, because I know that you have a lot of choices to make when it comes to entertainment and podcasts and television now. There's so much going on. But you took the time to listen to us today, and I appreciate that so much. If you haven't already, if you liked what you heard, please share this with someone else. Just share the podcast with them. And don't forget to make sure you just subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Just go, you can do that wherever you get your podcast from, or just go over to postventionconsulting.com, click on the Hope Debrief, and that'll take you to the page, and you can subscribe from there as well. On behalf of Denise and myself, thank you again for joining us right here on the Hope Debrief.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone.